The small cafe was quiet that evening, with only a few regulars scattered across the tables. Most of them were lost in their own thoughts, reading or quietly chatting. The air smelled faintly of coffee and baked bread, and soft lights cast a warm glow over the wooden floor. In one corner of the room, a grand piano sat, polished and gleaming but mostly ignored. It was more of a decoration than a stage. Sometimes, someone would press a few notes for fun. But it was never the center of attention. She walked in quietly, almost blending into the background. No one really noticed her at first. She was not dressed like a performer, not wearing anything flashy, just a simple sweater and jeans, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She carried herself with a calm confidence, yet there was no sense of arrogance. She glanced at the piano as she walked past it and paused, taking a deep breath. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if they already remembered something important. The barista noticed her standing there and smiled politely. "Do you want to play something?" he asked casually, not expecting much. She nodded. "Yes, if it's okay." A few regulars raised their eyebrows, curious but not overly interested. One man leaned back in his chair and whispered to his friend, "Probably just a simple tune. Nothing fancy." Another woman chuckled softly. "Yeah, let's not expect too much." The atmosphere was light, casual. No one thought this would be a performance to remember. She walked slowly to the piano and sat down. Her posture was relaxed, but attentive. She placed her fingers on the keys and paused for a moment, as if listening to something only she could hear. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, delicate in the quiet room. It was the kind of melody that anyone could play if they knew the basics. A few people nodded politely, satisfied with the simplicity. The man who had whispered earlier smirked, shaking his head slightly. "See, told you. Just a little tune." But then something changed. Very subtly, almost unnoticeable at first. The melody shifted, the notes flowing more freely, more confidently. The sound grew richer, fuller. Her fingers moved with ease, each key pressed with purpose. The music began to tell a story, though no one could put it into words yet. There was emotion in every note, a quiet intensity that made the room feel smaller and more intimate. The regulars, who had been half listening and half distracted, began to pay closer attention. The woman who had been giggling leaned forward slightly. The man with the smirk stopped moving his head and looked straight at her hands. Something was happening, though no one yet understood the depth of it. She did not rush. She did not try to impress. Every movement of her hands was deliberate, every pause meaningful. It was as if the piano had become an extension of her thoughts, and she was speaking to the room through its keys. The music was no longer simple. It had layers. There were moments of softness that made people hold their breath, and sudden bursts of energy that made hearts beat a little faster. A young boy in the corner, who had been quietly playing with his toy car, stopped completely. His eyes were wide, staring at the piano as if he had never heard anything like it before. Even the old man near the window, who had seen hundreds of performances in his life, furrowed his brows in concentration. He did not move, did not blink, simply listened. The barista wiped his hands on a towel and leaned against the counter, unable to look away. He had expected something simple, something polite to fill the background. This was different. This was alive. She glanced around the room briefly, though her eyes did not meet anyone in particular. She seemed focused on the music itself, not on the reactions it was creating. Yet with every note, she was slowly pulling the attention of the entire cafe toward her. People began to realize that this was more than a casual performance. There was skill, yes, but there was also feeling, something deep and personal. It was the kind of playing that made people remember a moment long after it had passed. Some tried to whisper to each other, "She's really good." But no one could find words that matched what they were hearing. Her hands moved faster now, the music building with confidence. The simple tune she had started with became a canvas for something much greater. There were small improvisations, tiny shifts in rhythm and tone that made the melody dance and breathe. Every note seemed to carry a story, a memory, a secret emotion. A few more people entered the cafe, unaware of what was happening. and immediately stopped in their tracks when they heard the music. They paused, unsure if they should keep walking, drawn in by the sound. They looked around, trying to find the source, and finally saw her at the piano. They took a seat, silently, captivated before even realizing why. She did not speak. She did not smile. She let the piano do all the talking, and the piano spoke clearly with a voice that demanded attention without force. It was a quiet authority, an invisible power that filled the room and touched every person in it. Time seemed to slow. The moments stretched longer, the music wrapping around the listeners, pulling them in. The regulars, who had been distracted by their phones or conversations, now sat completely still. Even the boy had stopped fidgeting, his eyes glued to the keys as if he could see the music forming in the air. No one clapped. No one made a sound. They were too busy being present, too absorbed to break the spell. Her playing was precise, yet it had imperfections that made it human. Every slight hesitation, every variation in volume, added depth and character. It was not just skill, it was honesty. And honesty, in this quiet moment, was more powerful than any display of technical mastery could be. A few people exchanged glances, whispering softly to each other. "Did you hear that?" "It's beautiful." Another nodded, almost in disbelief. "I've never heard anything like it." Even the cafe owner, who had seen hundreds of performers and students, leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, astonished. He had expected background music, a simple tune to fill the silence. Instead, he found himself caught in a performance that seemed both personal and universal at the same time. The music continued to grow. It was not loud, but it was impossible to ignore. There was a rhythm that moved with the natural flow of emotion, a melody that twisted and turned, sometimes gentle, sometimes urgent. It was like listening to a story unfold without words. It's a story that everyone could understand, yet no one could fully explain. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the keys beneath her fingers. There was a quiet smile on her face, but it was not one seeking approval. It was a smile of someone completely in their element, someone who had found a way to express a part of themselves that words could not touch. People in the cafe began to notice small details. The way her fingers curved over the keys, the subtle shifts in her posture as she reached for the higher notes, the way her breathing seemed to follow the music. It was all connected, a seamless expression of thought and feeling. The man who had whispered earlier, the one who thought it would be just a simple tune, now sat frozen. His smirk had disappeared, replaced by awe. He whispered under his breath, How is she doing that?" No one had an answer. They simply listened, rapt and amazed. By the end of the first hour, the room had transformed. What had been a casual cafe, a place for coffee and small talk, was now a small sanctuary of sound. Everyone present was connected not by words or shared experience, but by the music that flowed from her hands. She did not finish with a flourish or a dramatic ending. The first part of her performance simply ended with a gentle slowing of the notes, fading into the quiet hum of the cafe. It was as if she had given them a glimpse of something larger, something that could not yet be fully understood. People sat for a moment, almost afraid to break the silence. The boy whispered, "Wow," barely audible. The woman at the table near the window covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The man who had doubted her looked down at his hands, unsure what to do with them. The barista cleared his throat quietly, as if afraid to disturb the magic. He gave her a small nod, acknowledging that something extraordinary had just happened. She stood slowly, brushing her fingers against her sweater. There was no boastfulness, no call for attention. She simply nodded to the room and stepped away from the piano, leaving the notes lingering in the air. And in that lingering silence, everyone realized something important. What they had just heard was not about playing a tune. It was about presence, about emotion, about a quiet strength that could not be underestimated. No one spoke immediately. They sat, absorbing what had happened, each person processing it in their own way. Some smiled, some closed their eyes, some simply stared at the piano in awe, and in that quiet. One thing was certain: the simple piano in the corner of a small cafe had just become the stage for something unforgettable. The cafe stayed quiet for a few moments, as if everyone was holding their breath. The soft hum of the lights and the distant sound of cars outside were the only interruptions. People were still absorbing what had just happened, trying to understand how something so simple could feel so powerful then. Without any announcement or fanfare, she returned to the piano. The first part of her performance had ended gently, almost like a quiet invitation. Now, as she sat down again, there was a sense of anticipation in the room that no one had expected. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment. She closed her eyes and let out a soft breath, and then she began to play again. This time, the music was different. The simple melody from before returned briefly, familiar and comforting, but it quickly transformed. She added layers, subtle harmonies, and delicate rhythms that no one had anticipated. The room felt smaller, more intimate. Every note she played seemed to reach directly into the hearts of those listening. People leaned forward in their chairs, unable to tear their eyes away. Each sound carried emotion, joy, longing, a hint of sadness, and it all blended together in a way that was impossible to ignore. The young boy in the corner clutched the edge of his seat, eyes wide. The soft hum of the cafe faded into the background as the music took over. Even those who had entered late paused near the doorway. Captivated by the transformation in the melody, her hands moved with a confidence that seemed effortless, yet there was precision in every movement. It was clear she had spent countless hours practicing, yet it was not about showing off skill. The music was alive, breathing, and speaking for her in a way words could never manage. At first, the audience listened quietly, unsure of how to respond. They didn't clap or cheer because it felt too early for that. Instead, they let the music fill them, letting it take over the space in their thoughts. Some closed their eyes, others simply stared at her fingers, mesmerized by how quickly the notes flowed and how naturally the melody grew. She did not rush. The performance had a rhythm of its own, sometimes soft and delicate, other times bold and powerful. It was as if she was telling a story, not in chapters, but in emotions. Each note was a word, each phrase a sentence. And the whole piece formed a story that everyone could understand without needing a single word. The cafe owner, who had been standing near the counter, was leaning forward, eyes fixed on the piano. He had seen many performers over the years, some skilled, some passionate, but this was different. There was an authenticity here that couldn't be taught. The way she poured herself into the music, the care in each movement, was undeniable. People began to feel the story in their own way. A woman near the window wiped a tear from her cheek, surprised by how moved she was. The man who had doubted her earlier leaned back in his chair, silent, unsure of how to process the emotions rising in him. Even the boy's mother, who had been quietly sipping her coffee, reached out to hold his hand, feeling the music together. The piano sang, and the room seemed to sway with it. The simple tune had grown into something intricate and breathtaking. She moved between highs and lows, fast and slow passages, weaving the music together in a way that felt both natural and extraordinary. Every change in tone was intentional, guiding the audience through the emotional journey she had created. No one spoke. Even whispers would have felt like a disruption. The audience was completely absorbed, caught in a moment that seemed to exist outside of time. The barista, who had been wiping tables earlier, stood silently, feeling the vibrations of the music echo through the cafe. He had thought it would be a simple performance, something to fill the background. Now, he was witnessing something unforgettable. Her fingers danced over the keys, moving with a fluidity that made it look effortless. Yet each movement held purpose. She added small, unexpected touches that made the music feel alive, playful at times, and deeply emotional at others. It was impossible not to feel the energy she was putting into every note. The cafe had become a small sanctuary, a place where the outside world didn't exist for a while. People forgot their phones, their conversations, their worries. All that mattered was the music and the woman at the piano, who had managed to hold their hearts in her hands. A few people shifted in their seats, trying to absorb more fully what they were hearing. The old man by the window leaned forward, hands clasped together, and closed his eyes. He had played the piano many times in his youth, but even he felt humbled by the performance. The music was honest, raw, and real. It was not just about technique. It was about life, experience, and emotion. The melody began to rise, building toward something bigger. It was still delicate in places, but now there were moments of fire, of intensity, that made the room vibrate with energy. People felt it in their chests, a rhythm that matched their own heartbeat. Even the boy's toy car was forgotten as he watched her hands. She moved faster and more confidently. She did not look at the audience. Her eyes were closed, her focus completely on the piano, but the room could feel her energy. Every note carried a part of her, a piece of her story, even if no one knew what it was. And in that moment, the audience didn't need to know. They felt it anyway. The music shifted again, softening, slowing. It was like a gentle wave after a storm, calming and reflective. The audience leaned in, savoring every moment, knowing that the end was near, but not wanting it to come too soon. The melody became more intimate, almost fragile, as if she were sharing a secret with everyone in the room. Her hands moved gracefully, fingers gliding across the keys. The notes lingered in the air, echoing softly after each strike. The audience felt the weight of every sound, the emotion behind it, and a sense of connection spread through the room. They were no longer strangers, sharing the same space. They were part of the same moment, tied together by the music. Then, without warning, the music shifted one final time. It became bold, strong, and triumphant. The simple tune that had started the evening was now a powerful statement, full of life and energy. Her fingers moved quickly, confidently, and every note seemed to shine brighter than the last. The audience could not help but be drawn in completely, swept away by the transformation of something so simple into something extraordinary. The crescendo built to a point where the room seemed to vibrate with the sound. People leaned forward, captivated, holding their breath as the music reached its peak. And then, just as suddenly, it softened again. The final notes were delicate, gentle. Lingering in the air like a whispered goodbye, there was a moment of complete silence. The cafe felt suspended, as if everyone was holding on to the final echoes of the music. Then slowly, a single clap broke the stillness. One by one, the rest of the audience joined in. Claps grew louder, more intense, until the room was filled with applause, cheers, and a few emotional gasps. The young boy's eyes shone with wonder. The woman near the window wiped her tears and smiled through her emotions. Even the man who had doubted her sat back, mouth slightly open, unable to find words. The barista stood behind the counter, clapping along with the rest, feeling honored to have witnessed something so rare. She stood slowly, her hands brushing the keys one last time. She offered a small, humble nod to the audience, not with pride but with quiet acknowledgement of the moment they had shared. There was no boast, no performance for recognition. She had given them a gift, and the room had received it fully. People continued to clap, some even standing, cheering, and calling out their appreciation. But she simply stepped back, letting the applause wash over the room, letting them feel the impact of what had just happened. The music had ended, but its effect lingered in the hearts of everyone present as the cafe returned to its normal rhythm. People could not stop talking quietly among themselves about what they had just experienced. The young boy kept glancing at the piano, hoping the music would start again. The old man shook his head in disbelief, muttering softly, "I've never heard anything like that in my life." Even strangers who had never spoken to each other before shared a look of understanding, a silent recognition that they had been part of something special, something that went beyond skill or technique, something that touched the soul. The woman at the piano gathered her things slowly, taking in the room one last time. She did not need words to convey gratitude. The smiles, the tears, the stunned expressions of everyone present said more than words ever could, and as she walked out of the cafe, leaving behind the piano and the echoes of her music, the audience remained behind, changed in ways they could not fully explain. The memory of the performance would stay with them. A reminder that talent and passion could emerge in the most unexpected moments and in the most unassuming places. The simple piano in the corner had become a bridge, connecting hearts and leaving everyone who witnessed it with a sense of wonder. They had come for coffee, for a quiet conversation, for a regular evening, and instead, they'd experienced something extraordinary. The music had ended, but its magic lingered,